So this is the first unit of Bus 2. So the last for me was employing people. So we decided what type of person we wanted. This time we're looking at how we actually get hold of them. So we've decided perhaps we want a full-time employee who's going to be permanent. So how is it that we recruit them and select them? And then once we've got them, how do we train them to make them be even better? The first part of this unit though, we're just going to look at recruitment and selection, otherwise this PowerPoint would have been too long. So Bus 1, if you remember, was all about setting up a small business. Bus 2, however, is concerned with managing a business that already exists. So the core theme of this unit is improving the effectiveness of a business. It examines the growing business, focusing on a regional or national, but definitely not an international business. The core theme of effectiveness is evaluated through measures of a business's effectiveness and how effectiveness is improved through the actions of the business's four main functional areas. Now these are the four things that you must remember. So the four functional areas are finance, so to do with money, people or human resources, so obviously to do with employees, operations management, so to do with the making or the producing of things, and marketing. So the study of how these functional areas all contribute to the effectiveness of the business, so how marketing makes a business successful, how people make a business successful, all forms the basis of this unit. So the first bit of this presentation, the first bit of this topic, is going to look at the recruitment process. So from identifying a vacancy to the receipt of applications, and we'll also look at the explanation of what a personal specification is and what a job description is. The benefits and drawbacks of internal and external recruitment are analysed, and we also look at the best methods for selecting new employees, which might include interviews or assessment centres and tests, and we'll also look at how recruitment and selection can improve an existing workforce. So first of all, let's not get these two words mixed up then. They both mean different things. Recruitment is about identifying the need for a new employee and attracting the best candidate for the job. Selecting is about choosing the most suitable candidate for the job in order to meet the requirements of the organisation. So recruitment is deciding who we want or what we want in an employee and getting that person to reply to us. Selection is once, say, 5 or 6 people are chosen out of to make a shortlist. How do we choose out of those 5 or 6 people who would be the best? And every business and every job in some way or another goes through what we call the recruitment process. So first of all, a job, a vacancy arises. So it might be that, say for instance in a school, a teacher leaves. Then we actually have to decide whether that's sensible that is filled. If it's someone who's teaching Japanese and no one wants to learn Japanese anymore, well then do we actually need someone to teach it? Once that has been decided, we define what it is that we want that job to do. So what about a Japanese teacher do we want? What skills do we want? What type of person are we looking for? Once we've got that, we can decide, or we can tell people what the job will be. So we will describe the job. We will tell people how many hours we might work, for instance. We will also tell people what type of person we're looking at, what type of person we're looking for. So when it says job specification here, you'll also hear that called personal specification or the person specification. So describing the type of person that we want for the job. The second stage then is how we actually attract employees. So that means we're going to advertise the job. Where do we advertise it? How do we advertise it? And once that's happened, how do we actually select the person that we want? So it might be through an interview, or it might be through different ways of testing who's good at what. So the recruitment process, regardless of how big our business is, all of this is gone through at some different point. So workforce planning. The human resource requirements, so the people requirements of the organisation, need to be determined by the use of a workforce planning technique. So many organisations decide to fill vacancies that occur without really considering whether there are alternatives to recruitment and selection. For instance, do we actually need the person? Has our capacity or has our demand changed? So if demand has fallen, do we actually need to replace that person at all? So if we're doing it well, we might decide that lots of people are under capacity. So it might be that people have spare time, in which case existing staff could do the job. Could we pay existing staff to work a little bit more? So could we do overtime? Let's think back to the topic we've just done. It might be that we only need a person to do a job for a seasonal period of time. So can we employ a temporary worker, for instance? Is there new technology that could mean that we don't need that person at all? Could we buy a robot? Could it be that a computer has helped us become more efficient, so we don't need two people doing a job, we just need one? Or outsourcing, could we pay someone else? Could we pay another organisation to do it for us? Once it has been established, though, that recruitment and selection need to take place, we do something called job analysis. This is where the tasks, the skills, the responsibilities, the duties, and the level of performance that are required are analysed, and what we call a job description is produced. So this decides what we actually want in the job, and then that leads into a job description, which tells candidates who might apply for the job what is expected in the job, and it also helps the firm to identify the qualities needed in an individual to be selected for the job. It usually consists of the job title, the main purpose of the job, who the job holder would be answerable to, so who would be their manager, the main duties and tasks of the job, and also any authority the job holder will have, so who they might be in charge of, whether they're in charge of any money or any particular areas of the business. Next comes the person or the job specification. You might hear either of them, the personal specification, you might hear job specification, you also might hear it called the personal specification. They all mean the same thing. Basically, this provides details of the ideal candidate, the perfect person who a business is looking for, by listing the essential criteria, so the things that are absolutely necessary, and the desirable criteria, so things that would be nice of the person who would like to do the job. It is then used to identify the criteria that should be used in shortlisting. So shortlisting, say, if 1,000 people apply for the job, how would we narrow those 1,000 people down to enough that we could interview? So we would do something called shortlisting. So we would use this personal specification to do that. So if we say that we need someone who's good at teamwork, how have they proved that they're good at teamwork when they've been applying, for instance? There are a number of different formats for personal specification. More and more personal specifications are based on a set of competencies identified as necessary for the performance of the job. Now there's this word competency here. Be careful with that. The term competences is used in a personal specification. It has a very precise meaning. It is defined as the behaviours that an employee must have or must acquire to achieve high levels of performance in a particular situation. You should definitely not confuse it with the standard word, like the non-business word, competence. So competence is different to competences. So say, for instance, a competence in the non-business world is just a set of minimum standards. So for instance, when someone passes their driving test, you are called a competent driver. But that's not what we mean when we're talking about a personal specification. So in general, a personal specification should include a certain number of things. So it needs to include things like the skills, the aptitude and the knowledge and the experience that we would be expecting of an employee. It needs to include qualifications, which should only really be those things or those qualifications which are necessary to do the job, unless candidates are recruited on the basis of what their potential in the future might be. So for instance, a university graduate, for instance. It should also include personal qualities relevant to the job, so the ability to work as a member of a team, for instance. These factors are then ranked as either being essential or desirable, and then applicants will be judged against them at interview. So we've drawn up a job description, we've drawn up a person specification. Now we have to decide where we're going to get that person from. So we can do it externally or we can do it internally. So external recruitment is filling a job by advertising outside of the firm. internal recruitment is filling a job vacancy by selecting a person who is already employed by the organisation. So let's think about how we would decide between external and internal recruitment. Well, once a job description and person specification is drawn up, we do have to decide one way or the other. So we think about the positives and negatives. So the arguments in favour of recruiting internal candidates might include: we already know the employee, which means we already know their abilities as well. So yes, we might know they're not very good at some things, but we will know that they're good at others. So it's that they're a known quantity. Internal promotion. So if you're promoted from inside the business, you go to a higher level in the business. So a shop floor worker might go on to be a supervisor. That can be quite motivating because people see that if they do well and if they work for the business and they're good at their job, they can get a promotion with more pay and more benefits. So by internal recruitment, employees might be more motivated, which might mean that the business becomes more effective and ultimately makes more profits. Because we're not going outside, we don't have to advertise outside the business, we don't have to draw up an advert. It could be that, well, we do have to draw up an advert, but it doesn't have to go into a paper or onto an external website. It could mean that it's quicker. If it's quicker, that means that the person is in the job sooner, so it could mean that, again, we save time and become more efficient. An induction period is the training you get when you very first start an organisation. So showing people how to do the job, showing people around the building, showing people who they need to talk to if they've got a problem, all the safety procedures, things like that. Well, if you already work in the organisation, the induction period will be very short. All of this means that internal recruitment is generally less expensive and it's also less risky than external recruitment because we know the person already. We always do like to balance positives and negatives. Internal recruitment does create another vacancy. So if you're promoted from a teacher to be a head of department, that means we still need another teacher to fill that job. So internal recruitment does create another vacancy. It also means that there's no new ideas coming in. If a new person comes into the organisation and with them comes new ideas on how to do a job or how another business might have done it a different way. So the opposite of internal, obviously external recruitment. In contrast, it does tend to bring a larger choice of well-qualified applicants. So if it's internal, we're only choosing for people who already work there. If it's external, it could be anyone in the world if we're using things like the internet. This time it does bring new blood, so it brings new ideas into the organisation, which will improve understanding of how other firms do things. So it could be that another firm's especially good at doing something. So if we got one of their employees, we could become better. We could find out exactly what it is that they do to make them so good. And it might mean that we avoid jealousy over promotions. So if you've got two people working together who go for the same job, obviously only one person can get it. So the other person might feel jealous of the person who did get the job, and that might demotivate them, which might mean that their job isn't done to the same level of effectiveness. Again though, I've made a mistake there, that should obviously be external recruitment. There's still going to be disadvantages because we're not just staying inside our business, we're having to go to a wider audience, so we might need more widespread advertising, so it is going to be more expensive. So the advertising media then. So decisions must be made about how the most appropriate advertising media is chosen and which one that we decide to use in order to choose the most suitable candidate. So if you think, if we're advertising for a chief executive, so the top manager for British Airways, for instance, we wouldn't put a card in a local newsagent's window. But similarly, if we're looking for a newspaper boy or girl, we wouldn't advertise that online throughout the world. So you've got to match what you need or your requirements to the type of media that you use in order to advertise the job. So there are lots of different types. We might use a national or a local newspaper. We might use a trade or professional magazine. So say for instance the teaching jobs are often advertising what's called the Times Educational Supplements. That's a particular trade or a professional magazine. A job centre might be used. This helps people to find jobs locally and can also direct individuals to government-funded training schemes as well. You might use employment agencies, which provide short lists of candidates for interviews. Because the agencies do the advertising and the initial shortlisting, this does remove the administrative burden from the firm who's looking to hire the employee. But agencies do charge quite large fees and often deal with temporary staff. Places such as the Army have their own careers centres. There's something, certainly when I was at university, it's not used quite so much now, but you might hear the phrase the milk round, whereby larger employers usually go around universities looking for the best graduates. They also might go into local schools or colleges. As well as newspapers, we might have local and national radio and television. More so now, we could look at the internet. If it's internal, you might want to use newsletters or notice boards or simply word of mouth. And there's also something called headhunting as well. Now, headhunting is where recruitment consultants, so people who work for employment agencies often, seek the right person for a job. It tends only to be used for very senior managers and top-ranking professionals. The main advantage of this is that headhunters may find someone who is perfect for the job, who wasn't actually looking to move or looking to change their job at the moment, and would therefore not have even been looking at an advert or not have noticed an advert. So they specifically go out and find someone who wants the job, who would be good at the job, It's usually very expensive because it is labour intensive, so it uses a lot of people's time. So that's why you would only really use it for top level jobs. So once we've chosen that media, we've got to decide whether it was the right media to use. Well, we can do this by monitoring how effective it is. We do that by calculating the cost of attracting each new recruit. So for instance, it might cost very little to attract someone by the internet, but it might cost a great deal to attract someone by national television. So we need to weigh up the pros and cons of the cost of finding people against the type of person that we need to find. Okay, so we've decided what media to put our advertisement in, but what actually should we put in a job advert? Well, we need to outline the requirements of the job, so what the job will do. We need to say what the desirable and the essential criteria are. We need to say what the business does, so who would you be working for, the job location, so where you'd be working, the reward package, so things like pay and holidays, the tenure, now that's the technical term for whether the job is temporary or permanent. How to actually apply, so should you do it online, should you do it in person, should you do it over the phone? Interesting, local newspapers and company websites are the most used method of advertising now. So we would have to design our advert to either work in a local newspaper or on a company website. So when we're designing our advert, we have to match those needs. So candidates attracted by the vacancy will be asked to send in a completed application form or what's called a curriculum vitae, or CV, you'll have seen it, and also a letter of application. An application form provides information in a standard format. This allows a business to collect information from job applicants in a systematic way and assess a candidate's suitability for a job, therefore making it easier to pre-select candidates. Although CVs include similar information, such as details of who you are, your qualifications, your experience, and why you think you're suitable for the job, they do vary considerably. So everyone has their own style, which makes it much more difficult to compare person with person. A CV is usually accompanied by a letter of application. Increasingly, both application forms and CVs are starting to be submitted online. When a business draws up an application form, again, there's certain things that it probably should include. It needs to be realistic and appropriate to the level of the job, so it's pointless it being too complicated if it's for a very basic job, and again, it shouldn't be too basic if it's for a very complicated job. It should use clear language and should be readable and should be easy to complete. It shouldn't request detailed information unless it's relevant to the job. So you'll find things more and more. You do see things like what is your sexuality or what is your religion. In a lot of the cases, they shouldn't really be asking that unless it has a direct impact on the job that you're doing. It'll give you information about the interview or what you might require for the interview. It also should help the organisation draw up a shortlist, so it should be related to the job description or the person's specification. It also helps track how the applicants found out about the job. So it might have a ticky box which says, did you see this job advertised in the paper, online, or wherever, just so we can track what type of adverts work best. And it should provide a store of information about good but unsuccessful applicants. So you hear when people say, oh, I came second for my job, someone else got it that was slightly better. Well, what happens if that person leaves? Well, the business might come after you. So an application form should keep records of who was good, who didn't actually get the job. So shortlisting. The best candidate for the job must be selected. This is usually done by assessing a candidate's application or a CV against the criteria set out in the person's specification. The result will be a short list of a small number of applicants. References from previous employers or tutors, if you haven't been into a job and you've just been to school or college, are then requested in order to confirm information about candidates' abilities, skills and experience. So a shortlist might be 6 or 7 people that are going to be invited to interview or invited to test. So we're breaking it down from potentially thousands into 6 or 7. So those thousands are the long list, these 6 or 7 are the short list. So we use the personal specification to see out of these thousands of people who would be the best people to interview based on the skills and the qualities that we're looking for. Okay, so interviews or other methods of assessing who would be best. So suitable candidates, after they've been shortlisted, will then be called for interview or asked to take part in some other method of assessment. Research suggests that although interviews are the most traditional and still the most popular method of selection, they're not necessarily the most effective at indicating how well a person will perform in a job. This is because interviewers tend to be swayed by appearance and personality and are often overly influenced by first impressions. Also, because interviews are very much an act, you can learn how to be very good in interviews even if you're not going to be that good at the job. So for this reason, other selection techniques are often used in addition to interviews. So they might include aptitude and attainment tests. These measure how the applicant copes with when they're presented with a particular business situation, or how good the applicant is at particular skills such as word processing or a language or adding up, things like that. It might be that the business uses a psychometric or a personality test. These measure the personality, the attitudes and the character of applicants. So for example, whether they are team players or whether they are loners, whether they are passive or whether they are assertive, how good they are at problem solving, how good they are dealing with the unknown or uncertainty, and how creative they are. These tests are more common for graduate and management type level jobs though, so you wouldn't expect one of these if you're going to go and be a paper boy. There are criticisms about the effectiveness of psychometric tests, such as whether it is wise to want all managers to have particular and therefore similar characteristics, and the extent to which people answer the questions truthfully or simply give examples that they think will get the job. You'll have all done questionnaires like this in school when you think, oh, that if I answer A rather than B, it makes me look like a better person, therefore I'll answer that, even if you thought B was the answer you'd actually give. So it can lead to all the managers having similar qualities, or people having said what they think people want to hear, and therefore that's not really the person that they are. We also might use an assessment centre. So here, a group of candidates are invited to a particular location for a day or a few days of in-depth assessment. They are likely to be observed when they're doing loads of different tasks. It might be oral tasks or speaking tasks or written tasks that reveal their leadership. They might do role plays, teamwork, presentations. They might do problem-solving tasks. Research suggests that this method is the most effective one for predicting successful job performance. But it is very expensive because you're taking days out of people's time, and it's very time consuming, and it tends to be restricted to large firms and government departments, and to the selection of those people who are likely to fill senior positions in the future. So, for instance, high-flying graduate training programs. In general, though, the interview or the assessment method chosen must be the most appropriate one for ensuring the most suitable candidate is selected. Whichever the method is used, it is increasingly the case that human resource departments provide support to other functions. So, for instance, if someone in the marketing function has been hired for a new job, that human resources will help them, because it's becoming more and more difficult to choose the right person. So just because you don't work in the human resources department doesn't mean that you won't be helping out with interviews. If I was to ask you which is the best method of recruitment, well, there's that phrase again. It depends on the situation. We can help decide which is working best for us, though, by keeping records of the proportion of the people who remain with the business for a set period of time. So it might be that, say for instance, a teacher, if we say they've stayed with the school for 5 years, then that's positive. It means that we've got out of them what we want. And it might be that an interview provides people who stay for 5 years. But if we use an assessment centre, that might get the wrong type of person and they leave after 3. So for our particular school and our particular role, an interview was the best way. But you would have to judge on what the case study looks for. So when considering case studies in the exam, do try to assess whether the recruitment process is part of an overall idea, or whether it's just whether the person in the case study likes interviews or they like personality tests. You've got to use these things appropriately depending on the type of person you want to get. Once the best candidate has been selected, you've got to actually make sure that they want the job. So if 5 or 6 people have been interviewed, you must get the person who you want the job to accept that job first before you tell anyone else that they weren't successful, that they haven't got the job. There'd be nothing worse than to ring up 5 people to say you haven't got the job, then ring the one person who you would like to give the job to, only for them to have changed their minds, and then you've got to ring up someone else and say, actually, I've just told you haven't got the job, but how would you feel about taking the job now? It's also good practice to debrief or to tell those people who were shortlisted and interviewed who didn't get the job why they didn't get the job, so they can hopefully improve for the future. Explaining that they were not successful can be extremely useful to them if it's done sensitively and constructively. So not just saying you were useless, saying why you thought they were useless and what they could have done to improve. In relation to the whole process of recruitment and selection that we've looked at so far, it is vitally important that firms take into account the legal implications of equal opportunities. So there's something called the Equality Act now, and it looks at things like we can't just say we want a man rather than a woman. We can't say we're going to pay women more than men. We can't say we want someone black to work in this role rather than someone who's white. We can't say under no circumstances will we employ someone who's blind. And we can't say we want someone over the age of 30 years of age. We just simply cannot discriminate on those grounds. But that's actually a good thing. If we know that we can't ignore someone because of their age, we can't ignore someone because of their gender, it means that we're going to end up employing the best person for the job. We're not going to be discriminating against someone for stupid reasons. Just because someone's over a certain age doesn't mean they're going to be any better or any worse at a job. Just because someone comes from a particular race doesn't mean they're going to be any better or worse at a job. So because we can't use these things, it means that we're going to employ the best person for the job, which is only going to be good for our business. So, what factors will affect the methods of recruitment and selection that we use? Well, there's a number of factors, but the level of the job in the organisation, so whether it is shop floor or senior management level. So shop floor, we'll use a different type of recruitment selection. It might be shorter than if someone was a senior manager. That might take 2 or 3 days rather than 20 minutes. The size of the organisation, whether it's a large multinational or a small shop. The resources available to fund recruitment and selection. So again, if you're a small business with very few resources, you won't be able to afford assessment centres. You might not be able to afford psychometric tests. Possibly you can only afford interviews. The relative cost of any particular method. So recruitment and selection can be very expensive anyway, especially if it includes the cost of advertising, the cost of administering thousands of different applications, going through and reading them, and also the time spent shortlisting, interviewing and assessing. So if we can't afford to do all that, possibly we might want to go local, for instance, rather than national. So we get fewer people applying, so we don't have to read as many application forms and it won't take as long. Also, there's the supply of labour. Whether there are plenty of potential applicants with relevant skills and experience or whether there are few. So if there are few, perhaps we've got to cast our net a bit wider, so we'd have to go national this time rather than local. And also the culture of the organisation and the extent to which this dictates that internal recruitment and promotion are the norm. So if it's normal that you join an organisation and the culture is that after 4 or 5 years you will be promoted, then that's what we should continue to do possibly. We shouldn't be taking people from outside the business. If it's the case that we always bring in new blood every couple of years, well then we should possibly continue to do that as well. What about the importance of effective recruitment and selection? So why is it important? How is it important? Well, ineffective selection, so poor selection, can cause increased labour turnover. Now here I'll give you a definition of what labour turnover is. This is the proportion, so the number, so it might be, it's usually expressed as a percentage of employees leaving a business over a period of time, usually a year. So if there are, for instance, 100 people working in a business and 25 of them leave, then you could say your labour turnover in every year was 25%. So 25% of your employees leave every year. The problem with that is that if people leave, this leads to additional costs because there has to be more advertising to advertise for the person to fill that job. There's going to have to be more interviews, there's going to have to be more training. It also means that productivity is going to fall. So whilst that person has left, no one's doing their job. So our business isn't making as much, isn't selling as much. It also might reduce employee motivation because people have seen that their colleagues are leaving. On the other hand, effective recruitment and selection could lead to lower labour turnover and therefore lower costs, increased productivity and more highly motivated employees.